Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to KAISPE's webinar on Mastering NetSuite Customization. We'll be going over SuiteScript development and advanced PDFs. So let me give you a brief introduction about us. KAISPE is a Microsoft Gold partner and a leading ISV. Along with being an implementation partner for Microsoft, we also specialize in Oracle's NetSuite services with a dedicated team for NetSuite with more than 10,000 service hours. Before we begin, I request you to please keep your mics muted throughout this session. If you have any questions, please note them down in the chat and we will get back to you. With that, I hand you guys over to Shamir, who will be taking you through today's webinar.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session, webinar on mastering NetSuite SuiteScript customization and advanced PDF templates. My name is Shamir, and I'm an Oracle NetSuite technical consultant and software engineer. Over the past few months, I've had the privilege of working on various NetSuite customization projects, and today I'm excited to share my insights and practical tips with you. Let's move forward. Okay. For those who may be new to NetSuite, it's a comprehensive cloud-based ERP system that helps businesses manage their core processes such as finance, inventory, customer relationships, and more, all in one integrated solution. What sets NetSuite apart is its incredible feature flexibility, extensibility, and where SuiteScript comes in. Okay. So without further ado, let's jump into SuiteScripts. As many of you may be aware, SuiteScript is a NetSuite JavaScript-based scripting language that enables developers to tailor the platform to meet specific business needs. From automating tasks to integrating with external systems, SuiteScript makes NetSuite a highly customizable solution. Today, we'll cover one of the most powerful capabilities of SuiteScript, including advanced techniques to build robust scripts, avoid common pitfalls, and create customized PDF templates that truly alleviate your business purposes. My goal here is to help you deepen your understanding of NetSuite's potential and leave you equipped to tackle your own projects with confidence. A brief summary of what we will be covering in today's webinar is SuiteScript and its importance in NetSuite customization. I, for one, believe in practical implementation, so we'll be creating a button in NetSuite to utilize client and user event scripts and best practices and common pitfalls of SuiteScript development itself. And later, we'll have a practical guide to creating advanced templates using FreeMarker. So let's talk about SuiteScripts. As I mentioned, SuiteScript is a JavaScript-based API for customization automation. One of the many aspects of SuiteScript and its types are user event script, client script, scheduled scripts, and MapReduce scripts. As time is short, we'll be jumping into user event script and client script for creating a button within NetSuite that does some business logic. So let's move on to the NetSuite UI. This is the NetSuite's dashboard, the standard dashboard. Many of yours may be differ based on your preferences, but let's jump into an invoice to see how it looks like. Now, we'll be creating a button just beside related records, maybe name it KAISPE, and see what it does. As you know, this is an invoice, and what we can do here is get the customer's data. Let's see what the customer data holds. While that loads up, let's open our Visual Studio Code to get started with our user event script. So let's name this folder webinar. Okay, it already exists. Sure. So one of the naming conventions is in SuiteScript development is you need to name your JavaScript file based on your company and what you're doing with it. And at the end of the file name, you need to specify what is it? Is it a client script? Is it a user event script? It helps later in documentation and checking your work later on. So let's start with the user event script. Let's name it KAISPE button. UE. UE here stands for user advanced script.js. Now, since SuiteScript is a JavaScript-based development language, we'll be just importing the SuiteScript API, and then we'll move on with the vanilla JavaScript. Let's move on. In the initial stages, you need to define the API. For the webinar's sake, let's continue with 2.0. After that, you need to specify your script type. Sir, event script. After we are done calling the API, we need to define our modules, the native NetSuite SuiteScript modules that we'll be using. Let's start with one of the most important NetSuite modules is the nlog, how we log our debugging arguments or errors. Another is the nsearch. This is how we search records and everything in NetSuite. And maybe let's use runtime. This is worth mentioning when we are working with any type of SuiteScript script type. We need to define an entry point function. There are many entry point functions for user when script: before load, after submit, before submit. So these need to be defined, or otherwise you'll be thrown an error while uploading the file to NetSuite SuiteScript file cabinet. And load the context here. One of the best practices that I follow is implementing the try catch loop. So in case anything happens, it happens within the try catch loop. In case an error occurs, we'll say error in user event script, since we'll be working with two scripts simultaneously. And let's say error message. So let's get started. In the form, since we are creating the button, we'll be working with the form. Let's work with the context.form. And to add the button, form.add button. Now, the naming conventions for ID is one of the most confusing things. You need to provide clear ID on this in case in later stages, no developer gets annoyed that, hey, this ID is something else. So let's name something proper. Test page SP webinar. Let's name this as ID. For the label, let's name our button KAISPE. Now, in our client script, we'll be providing the function. So let's name, for that sake, let's name our button function name as get customer information. Let's name it info. And since we need to provide a client script module path for it to guide which client script we'll be using, let's form the client script module. Now let's venture into our document. folder to utilize where exactly we'll be providing the client script here. So my folder is already made here in the SuiteScript folder named Shamir. So we'll be uploading our client script later on here. So let's make sure SuiteScripts and Shamir. So let's mention it here. And we'll be naming our client script as same as our user event script. Just the difference will be at the end of the script type. Yeah, we're good to go. Now let's work on our client script. This was pretty much it for the user event type. KAISPE. Now, since working with NetSuite, we'll be only deploying the user event script. We do not need to deploy our client script. We'll just keep it in the file folder. I'll explain it later in the webinar as I do. Version 2.0. Let's name it and script type as client script. Now let's work on our modules here. And log, since we'll be calling our invoice record. So let's import our record. And to display a proper information, we'll be displaying in the logs, we'll be displaying in the UI. So let's work with a dialog box. Fortunately, NetSuite provides that too. I spelled record. So since we mentioned we'll be working on a function named, let's review the name. It shall be get customer info. So let's rename it here, get customer info. So we'll not be passing any context here. So let's review anything that we will be passing to context. One of the main things while working with SuiteScript is to make sure that you return your function while you're working with it. This is one of the most important aspects of SuiteScript. You need to return your function after you're done working on it. Otherwise, it will not be called. Great. Now we need to define, this is our own function. We need to define an entry point function here. So let's work with page init. This is the NetSuite's entry point function. And we'll just pass context here. The need to provide a entry point function is necessary. Otherwise, the NetSuite software won't accept the file. So the page init function may just call log. Well, it may just say page init initialized. Yep. Now we return our functions, both of them. Yeah. Let's work with page init first. Page init. And return our get customer info function. We're done with that. And let's now work at a function. Or now let's just say it says log.debug. Should say something when it's clicked. Let's say KAISPE button, click. And before working further on our script, let's deploy our user event script and our client script so that we can reflect our changes as we work throughout. Yep, let's first upload our client script. Give it a second. It got uploaded. Now for the user event script. It got uploaded as well. Now, while working with multiple scripts or any script, we need to make sure let's first deploy it, then we'll talk about it. Okay, let's go to customize scripting and we'll be deploying a new script. Since we'll be only working with deploying with user event script, let's deploy it. KAISPE user event. Let's create the script record. This is our KAISPE button. Sure, it just came up. User voice user event. Let's type in as. Now it's necessary that we provide a dash here before working with our IDs, since NetSuite already attaches its own cust page, cust script type of IDs itself. So we need to provide a dash before it. Otherwise, the naming conventions will, the ID would not appear as a right naming convention and would confuse the later developers later who will be working on your script. So let's name it KAISPE ETN and zero went. Yep. So let's save and deploy our script. First, I only wanted it, or okay, one of the things we make to make sure is not to provide a space here. Good. Let's deploy our script. So what should it apply? Since we are working with invoice, so we need to apply it to our invoice. And as you have seen, I provide the ID as KAISPE button user event. This was the ID I provided to our script, and for the deployment part, we'll just add the DEP to signify that it's the deployment ID. Log level we have set to debug. Current role, let's apply to all roles. Doesn't matter, our script will still be in testing. So let's save our script. That's done. So one of the parts I make sure while working with a script is making sure to open 3 tabs. One is the UI tab that I'll be working with. One is the deployment logs for all everything. And apart from that, let's open a script tab. So in case we need to edit our script, we need to be working on our script, we'll be able to edit on it. Okay, so this is the invoice. We should be able to see our button when we refresh it. Yep, our button got appeared, KAISPE button. Let's click on it. Shouldn't say anything right now. It just should log our debug statements. Debug, KAISPE button clicked. Great. So our button is working. Let's work on the code now of what we need to show here. Since I mentioned we'll be, excuse me, we'll be showing our customer data here mentioned in the invoice. So let's work on that in our code, in our client script. Before jumping into it, what we are doing here is the user event script was responsible for showing the button here on the UI, and on the client script, we'll be working our function. So you met in simpler terms, let's suppose user event works on the back end while client script works on the front end. Let's jump into our client script to work on our function. So to get, since we are not passing our context here, we'll not be able to work with get current record context.get current record. So we need to work on something how we'll get the invoice ID. One of the things worth mentioning here of what I discovered while working with SuiteScript is that in the URL, you can get the ID of any record that you're working with. And since we need to make it dynamic, we cannot just provide the ID as 820. So, well, researching about it, it's worth mentioning here that in case you cannot pass context to any function here, you can just retrieve it from the URL itself. How we'll be doing it, let's walk through it. You need to provide the number convention, location dot search dot match. And here we'll be working with, since we need to get just the ID here, let's work it out. And that will be providing the ampersand sign. And from then, we will be moving to add a plus sign here. Sorry. Add a slash here. Now, since we need to get just the one ID here, we'll provide one here in the array. What I did here is in the invoice ID, since I didn't pass context in our get customer info, which I cannot. So what I'm doing here is getting the invoice ID directly from the URL itself, 820. So let's jump right into the record here, since we got the ID. The type of our record will be invoice, of course. And the ID will be the invoice ID that I passed earlier. Great. So now to get the customer ID, we need to work with how the customer ID is stored here. How the customer, what's the proper ID for it? I think it should be entity. Well, one of the things worth mentioning here is when working with NetSuite, you need to install this extension here. NetSuite Field Explorer, it helps you find the IDs of any fields, whether they are custom made, whether they're native NetSuite. This helps finding the IDs of it. You can get the IDs through inspect element, but it's better to work with this extension since it gives a clear view without any CSS and HTML mentioned here. So I think the customer should be named with an ID of entity. Not sure. Let's see. Entity. So its name is entity. The entity's ID is 5. Entity's name. Things worth mentioning here is we need to work with the ID, not the name. It may sound that we need to work with the name, but trust me on this, we need to work with the ID, since ID will redirect it to the customer's data itself. So the ID is 5, and one of the things worth mentioning here is keep the code dynamic as possible. So We know that the ID is entity. Customer ID is equals to invoice record that we just worked with and get value of by the field ID, which we just discovered was entity. Now we need to provide some check in case there is no customer ID. What should a code do? So let's provide an if statement that, hey, if no customer ID is present here, then what you should do is throw new error that says that, hey, no customer plus a little space here. No customer ID provided. The invoice in case no customer ID is here. It should be impossible, but it's nice to have a check just in case. Now, since we got the ID of the customer, we should be able to work with this record. So let's load up the customer record. By the namespace, here's a maintain clean code. ID is customer ID that we just retrieved here. Now let's see what data we can get here. What data of the customer we should be able to get here. I'm thinking just get the name, the company name, and let's get the email and let's get the phone number. Let's keep things simple for the webinar. So let's get the company name, the email, and phone. I think that should be sufficient. So let's get back to our code. All right, so we will be getting the customer name. Get value. Since I'm a seasoned developer, I know the IDs of customer name and everything. And in case you need to view the IDs, just get this extension on your browser and just hit on it. And you should be able to see every ID possible here. All right, let's move back to our code. So we got the customer name. Let's add a few more fields. Customer email. Email. And just for the sake of webinar, let's get the phone. Yep, I made an error here. That's customer record actually. Didn't add the curly brackets. And the phone. That should resolve it. Okay, so in the UIA dialog box, we should be able to craft a message. So let's create a message for that, shall we? So let's declare our message here. Customer information. Let's leave a line here for clean code and a concatenate sign. Let's move on to the next line. Name. Let's concatenate the customer name, the name. And we should be able to add another line here for clean code. Mm, Since time is short, I'll just copy to the next line. This is email, this is phone, and this is customer. Oh, we got a message created, and let's now, yep, that's resolved. Let's now construct our dialog. I already called the dialog earlier here in our parameters to be exact. Dialog.alert, and yes, button is clicked. Name title as customer information. And the message is exactly the message that we just provided here. Great. We are done with our client scripts code. So all we gotta do is copy the code and we should be able to paste it. Scripts. Just go directly to the edit here. It should reveal here. Now this is our user event. So let's jump back to the file cabinet towards our client script. Let's edit our client script with our updated code. For now, it just says KAISPE button click. And now it has our updated code. Let's try saving it. Yep, that's accepted here. Now, let's see. Let's refresh here so our changes can be updated. Let's click on our KAISPE button. Give it a second, it's loading. Yep, we got our dialog box here. Customer information, name is Whitehall Specialties. The email is this and phone number is this. This is just random data. So for in the invoice, in case any functional consultant or anyone needs details for customer while being in the invoice UI itself, we created a button that gets the customer information. We can recheck our data from here. And to conclude, we successfully created a button within NetSuite using user event and client script. Great. Let's move on. Since we work with our SuiteScript, let's work on potential pitfalls here. What are the potential pitfalls that we may encounter? Let's move back to our presentation here. We are done with creating a button. Let's move on to the best practices and common pitfalls. One of the most important best practices is to follow governance limits, monitor API usage, and avoid exceeding scripts execution time. Since it is worth mentioning here that every script has its own governance limits. In case of talking about invoice, when working with invoice, the user event script initially just works with around 1,000 surplus fields. So in case you are working with multiple thousands or surplus fields in your invoice, sales order, or anything else within the surplus, you need to monetize your code, return it in parts, let the data return into your pods in the single multiple arrays so that you can work through the governance. Otherwise, your code may not work. Apart from that, modularize the code. Break logic into usable functions for better readability and maintenance. One of the transitions that we did in 2015 was moving from SuiteScript 1.0 to SuiteScript 2.0. Now, what we did was we could use modularized code for that, for the betterment. One of the reasons we do not use SuiteScript 1.0 is one of the modularized code isn't present, code readability is not up to the mark as compared to SuiteScript 2.0. Since we utilize ECMAScript's 2015 of JavaScript, and apart from that, used logging extensively. My working was straightforward here. So it's worth mentioning you need to add multiple logs as I did in my code in every execution. So the errors that may come up in your SuiteScript script deployment logs may not show you where exactly the error is coming from. So it is important that you log every line of your, either you're getting a field, either you're getting concatenating your data, doesn't matter. You need to log extensively for debugging and auditing purposes. And this is point is pretty much straightforward. We need to test in sandbox. One of the crucial businesses run in NetSuite, and we cannot test in production. Then again, we are working with highly compromised data, and it cannot change within our development environment. So we should be able to work with a sandbox before moving everything into production. Apart from that, stay updated to leverage SuiteScript 2.0. You need whenever we are working with as a developer, whenever we are working with SuiteScript, we need to be updated with the articles on SuiteScript. Many of the modules keep coming up. As we know, SuiteScript 2.x just came up. It's the latest version of SuiteScript. And whoever is working is updated, is reading articles, reading updates, is up to the brim. As you know, many of the developers working from 2012 didn't like to follow SuiteScript 2.0 language, so many of them didn't work up to the hierarchy, didn't become senior developers, didn't become solutions architect, didn't become the well developers that they should have been. Apart from that, again, it's worth mentioning, stay up to date with the latest SuiteScript articles. Now, moving on to the pitfalls, what we should avoid. Hard coding values. Avoid hard coding record IDs or field names, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar. We shouldn't hard code anything here. And make the code dynamic as possible. To maintain flexibility, of course, one of the problems that occurred in our NetSuite latest update in September, the 2024.2 update, was many of the suitelets URLs changed, and whoever had static URLs, or to say they hard-coded their URLs, all of the suitelets stopped working. So while working with URLs, field IDs, you need to make sure you're adding the values dynamically. In case a functional consultant changes the field, the ID, it will not be reflected back into the code if you have hard-coded those values. This is pretty much self-explanatory, ignoring governance. You shouldn't ignore governance. Every script type has its own governance going on, and it would not execute. It would just throw errors, and ultimately it would not work. So we need to make sure to follow the governance of every SuiteScript API type. Missing error handling. As I mentioned earlier, we need to add try catch blocks. So in case an error occurs, an error is thrown to our own understanding. As I said here, hey, let's implement a try catch here. Any error that occurred in our code, it should come like, hey, there error and occur in the user event script, and the error message should come like this. So it should be, everything should be on our control while working with our code. Now, while working with multiple APIs, avoid unnecessary calls and optimize loops. Since we're working with a very short record here, but in practical implementations, we'll be working with thousands of sublist fields and everything. While running our record, we need to make sure to optimize the loops so that the governance isn't compromised. One of the things worth mentioning here is use SuiteScript parameters for configuration and use NetSuite's native modules. There are many modules available for vanilla JavaScript. You can utilize them, but it's a bit more a good practice, you can say, to use the native NetSuite modules. Then again, you need to go through the documentation and make sure you review them perfectly for to use them and submit it to the Oracle SuiteScripts articles in case they make any changes. All right, moving on. Let's move to the practical guide to creating advanced PDF templates using FreeMarker language. FreeMarker, as you know, is a powerful tool for customizing PDF templates in NetSuite. It enables developers to dynamically generate content based on record data. You can, in simple terms, to define FreeMarker, it's more close to its brother HTML. And what more you can do is work through loops, you can work through conditions, and you can even work with formatting itself. Uh, just to show how a free marker language should look like, let's work on a loop. For example, just for the sake of webinar, we'll be working with any record. So for a condition statement, just for the sake of simplicity, I'm showing how a code should look like. I'll be taking you to the NetSuite UI itself, so no worries on that part. But to show you how it looks like, there, table data. And to show a field in FreeMarker, we use $sign. And this is how you actually set up any condition in, wait, this should be a record. So it doesn't matter any record you're working with, NetSuite directly just gets a record you're working with, be it an invoice, memo, or sales order. NetSuite should be able to detect that. And this is how you set up a condition here in FreeMarker. You can name it item name, item quantity, anything that you like. Let's review the advanced templates in our NetSuite UI. You can create a new template, or you can customize a standard one upon your requirements. So let's work with an invoice while we are at it. This is a standard invoice PDF template. Let's customize that. So since we'll be working with invoice, anything we'll add to record.item, it should automatically detect that yes, you're working with a record named invoice. So right here, this is called the WYSIWYG mode. What's the WYSIWYG mode? It's what you see is what you get. Now, we can either work our way through here, but since we are developers, we need to dive deep in our code. Beware the template editor may not function properly if you switch back to WYSIWYG mode. Sure. As I said earlier, it represents HTML more or less. So we'll be working with CSS too while we are at it. While testing with the code, this is pretty much self-explanatory. It's basic HTML. Let's preview. With the preview, you can view your developments, whatever you make here. One of the things that may come up is that, hey, this is pretty much basic HTML. What if a client comes up that you need to map data in, let's, let's give a practical implementation to show you guys what I'm trying to say. So let's jump into an invoice here. Give it a second. A requirement may come up. Let's first review the invoice here in the sublist. An employee named Kevin Hurst may have multiple lines of sublist covering here, and Michelle comes up in two sublist lines, and one's an empty line for employee name. One of the requirements that may come up is, hey, in the invoice template, what I want to do here is an employee name with just Kevin should be covered in one line. So every quantity, every rate, not rate, every quantity and the amount here, the total amount for this should add up in one line itself for Kevin Horst. And in the second line, anyone that may come up should be in their separate line itself. So there are multiple lines that Kevin Horst is taking in the sublist, but we need to put them in just one to represent them in just a single line in our invoice template. So we'll be working with many technicalities here to resolve that. And since a no employee name is came here, we should name it in another line. That name should be in other charges. So I worked through it here. What I did was, this was the invoice that I worked with. What I did was, hey, if an in the record.item, the NetSuite UI directly gets that you are working with an invoice. Hey, if an employee name is not present here, you should be able to submit it into an other charges. I created a separate map here, and for employee names, in case employee name is present, we need to make sure a single employee has his own sublist line with his amount added here and his quantity added up, everything like that. So this is one of the most advanced things I did based on the requirement using FreeMarker, creating a map. This could have been easily done with JavaScript, but hey, a requirement may come up and you should be able to loop through every field, work with conditions, create maps, create arrays. Now let's print our invoice for our example. Let's print it. And since I made this button using the previous examples that I showed using user event and client script. Also the colors defined here were used using CSS. So Kevin came up in multiple lines, but I defined it in just a single line based on the requirements using a map here that I showed. Everyone is coming here in their own line, and the other charges mean any data that doesn't have an employee name. That should come up here. So that's that. While working with FreeMarker, it's necessary to review the documentation, and the documentation is pretty much straightforward. It's basic HTML, but pretty much advanced version of it, if you may. Going back to our presentation here. It's worth mentioning the best practices of FreeMarker. One of the best practices that I encountered while working with FreeMarker in advanced templates is use placeholders for missing data to avoid template errors. So in case I did not want to, let's move. In case I did not want to show the rate here and it's available in my code, I should add comments here to make it the code more readable and avoid template errors. We should be able to test templates with different data scenarios before giving it to the project manager or to the client. You should test templates with different data scenarios to ensure its accuracy, and organize your whole code in sections while working with it. I added every comment here so code became more readable when I came back. When I'm working on a Friday and I came back on a Monday, I should be able to read my code again. So it's necessary that you add your code in sections and add documenting every line while coding. All right, we are done with FreeMarker. Let's move on to the Q&A. Thank you for attending today's webinar. I hope you had this session insightful and practical. As we wrap up, I'll open the floor for questions. Please feel free to ask about anything we covered today, and whether it's SuiteScript development or creating custom buttons or designing advanced PDF templates.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope that we don't have much questions left. So thank you, Shamir, for such an insightful and thorough session on script development and advanced PDFs. I hope you guys found this webinar helpful. We'll meet you in our upcoming sessions. Till then, take care and goodbye.
Goodbye.